Hello and welcome to Sustainability is the Key, one of our webinar series on how to unlock your organisation's potential to deliver tender success with me, Sarah Joy Newton. This is the longer version of the whole of your global carbon footprint. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sarah Joy Newton. I'm an adult and paediatric nurse. I then became a medical sales representative and then moved from there into finding out and working on how to get those products in front of the NHS and so people could buy them. So I'm an experienced tender bid writer now. I'm an expert in public procurement requirements, procedures compliance, including net zero, social value and modern slavery. The next NHS England milestone on the supply roadmap requires suppliers to report on emissions for global operations and all 15 categories of Scope 3 by April 2027. This is quite a big jump from what suppliers are being asked to do now. So we're going to look at that and how you can prepare for that. So the key learning points in this webinar, we're going to look at PPN 006 and the background legislation. NHS England Supply Roadmap. We'll look at what it means with your base year, reporting boundaries, Scope 1 and 2, Scope 3, all 15 categories, and then your conversion factors or data collection. So it all started back in October 2020 when the NHS released the report Delivering a Net Zero Health Service, in which they set out their ambitious target for the NHS to become the world's first carbon net zero national health system by 2045. The NHS also defined climate emergency also as a health emergency. In this report, they also said that before the end of the decade, the NHS will no longer purchase from suppliers that do not meet or exceed the commitment to net zero. This infographic was used by the NHS quite a lot in those early days, and it just really shows why they're asking suppliers to do this. Their Scope 3 category in one of the categories is purchase goods and services. And as we can see, there's this massive part in the middle of the pie graph, medicines, medical equipment and other supply chain. This is a huge amount of their carbon footprint, and it all sits with the supply chain. So it sits with you, the suppliers. In June 2021, we saw the PPN taking account of carbon reduction plans in the procurement of major governments contracts released. This was rebranded in February 25 and it's now PPN 006. And in it, you were asked to report on scopes 1, 2 and a defined subset of scope 3 emissions, commit to being net zero by 2050, and provide detail of environmental management measures that would be applied in the performance of the contract in the carbon reduction plan. This plan and your emissions then should be published on your company website. Most people who are supplying to the NHS now have a carbon reduction plan. But if you don't, please go back to my YouTube channel and have a look. We have a Sustainability is the Key webinar all about carbon reduction plans. So please go and have a look on that. The 5 Scope 3 categories that are included for at the moment are upstream transportation and distribution, waste, business travel, employee commuting and downstream transportation and distribution. I wanted to link this into the NHS England Evergreen assessment because that's something that most suppliers are mandated to complete on an annual basis now. Again, if you want to know more about this one, go to the YouTube channel. There is a Sustainability is the Key webinar on the Evergreen assessment. So please have a look if you don't know much about that one. But the components of it cover your progress around net zero, social value and modern slavery. There are 4 maturity levels and the maturity score is valid for 12 months. If you have a carbon reduction plan, you should be at level 1. If you're not at level 1 and you do have a carbon reduction plan, please reach out to me and let me know, because it will just be that you haven't answered one of the questions quite right, and the computer then has counted it as a no. And so let me know, I can help you get that level 1. The next milestone of April 2027 links into level 2. As part of your level 2 a maturity level, you need to be reporting on all your relevant scope 3 emissions. So that's where that sits. Also, to get a level 2, you need a modern slavery statement and a corporate social value programme. We have sustainability is the key webinars on both of these topics, and we can help you get those things in place if you need to get your level 2, to get that competitive edge, to be tender compliant. So get in touch if you want to know more about those, or go across and have a look at one of the webinars. The NHS Net Zero Supplier Roadmap infographic shows the path that they need suppliers to take. And the one that we're interested in today is from April 2027, all suppliers will be required to publicly report targets emissions and publish a carbon reduction plan for global emissions aligned to the NHS Net Zero target for all of their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. NHS England have published a milestone approach where they are at the moment, at the time of recording this webinar, we are at the place of internal and external engagement. We are recording this in September 2025. So we are hoping that soon we will see to the next step where we'll get the technical standard will be made available. But in the meantime, we're wanting to get suppliers ready. We're wanting to get reporting, and we're wanting to get people moving on this journey. So looking at some principles for accounting and reporting environmental impacts. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be quantitative. It needs to be as accurate as you can make it. You need to be seeking to reduce uncertainty in your reported figures where practical. You're looking for completeness, so quantify and report on all sources of environmental impact within the reporting boundary that you have defined. Consistency is really important. Comparable, you should be reporting data using accepted KPIs rather than choosing your own or internally KPIs that you are creating. It needs to be something that the rest of the market is using, and the GHG protocol is really helpful to go to for that. And we also have government conversion factors. Needs to be transparent. This is really essential to producing your carbon reduction plan, and behind a good carbon reduction plan is a methodology which explains your processes, systems and how you've got to where you are looking at with this. The source of this is taken from HM Government Environmental Reporting Guidelines, page 8, and they cited the GHG protocol corporate standard in this report. So what steps do you need to take? If you already have a carbon reduction plan, you may just be expanding on that, but you may need to go back to the beginning and redefine everything from step 1. So we're going to take this back to the beginning. Step 1, determine the boundaries of your organisation. Where does your organisation start and end? And where do your operations start and end? Step 2, determine the period for which you should collect data. We routinely use a calendar year, and the reason for that is conversion factors are aligned with the calendar year. Otherwise, you have to use 2 sets of conversion factor if you use, for example, a financial year, and that might be April through to March. Step 3 is to determine the key environmental impacts for your organisation. Step 4, measure and start collecting data. And then step 5 is to report on it. You would start with a base year. How do you set your base year? The base year can be a fixed or single year. It could be an average of years to allow for fluctuations. It could be a rolling base year. Some people then go on and recalculate their base year, and that might be required for some of the following reasons: mergers, acquisitions and divestments, outsourcing and insourcing of relevant activities, changes in calculation methods or improvements in the accuracy of factors such as emission factors or activity data that result in a significant impact on the base year figures, and discovery of significant errors or a number of cumulative errors that are now collectively significant to those numbers. The other thing that we may see is that some people may recalculate their base year when they expand their reporting to be global scope 3. So we're looking at the moment in our UK boundary, your carbon reduction plan is just emissions associated with the UK. That's now being expanded to global. This infographic from the GHG protocol is really useful to just in a picture say where your scope 1, scope 2 and what the 15 categories of scope 3 are. Scope 1 are your direct emissions from sources owned or controlled by the organisation. For example, emissions from combustion in owned or controlled boilers, furnaces, vehicles, etc. Emissions from chemical production in owned or controlled process equipment. Scope 2 are your indirect emissions from the consumption of purchased electricity, heat or steam. And here's the biggie. All 15 categories of scope 3 listed on one slide, but we're going to take them one by one now. Category 1 is purchased goods and services. This is the extraction, production and transportation of goods and services purchased or required, unless you've already covered them in categories 2 to 8. There are 4 different ways to calculate this, which require different data. To deliver this in the most accurate way, you need the carbon emissions from your suppliers relating to the products they are providing to you. You can use cradle to grate or life cycle emission factors. Category 2 is capital goods, extraction, production and transportation of capital goods purchased or required. All emissions accounted for in reporting and purchasing year. Again, there are 4 different ways to calculate this, so let's look at those. The 4 different ways to calculate your categories 1 and 2 could be 1, you could choose to use supplier specific method, product level data, lifestyle GHG emissions. You could use a hybrid method, scopes 1 and 2 of supplier and waste and transport of products. Section 3, you could use average data method using the mass of goods and services, capital goods and industry average emissions factors. Or 4, spend-based method. This is collecting data on economic value of goods and service capital goods and using industry average emission factors. These are listed in order of the best data down to the least robust. The UK government provides conversion factors for industry averages, so you may need to source the same conversion factors for international industries. Going back to the supplier specific method, here's some more information. We talked in that one about life cycle or cradle to gate emissions. So what are those? Life cycle includes emissions that occur every stage of the material or product's life, from raw material acquisition or generation of natural resource to the end of life. And then you've got cradle to gate, which includes all emissions that occur in the life cycle of a material product up to the point of sale by the producer. Category 3, fuel and energy related activities that are not already included in scopes 1 or 2. This is the extraction, production and transportation of fuels and energy purchased or required. So also known as WTT, or well to tank emissions. This uses data from scopes 1 and 2, and for UK-based businesses, there are government conversion factors for that. But if you need international conversion factors, you'll need to look elsewhere for those. Category 4 is your upstream transportation and distribution, which is already in scope under PPN 006. This is the transportation and distribution of products purchased in the reporting year between a company's tier 1 suppliers and its own operations in vehicles not owned or operated by the reporting company. It's also third-party transportation and distribution services purchased by the reporting company in the reporting year, including either directly through an intermediary, including inbound logistics, outbound logistics, so for example, sold products, and third-party transportation and distribution between a company's own facilities. Outbound logistics services purchased by the reporting company are categorised as upstream because they are a purchased service. Category 5 is your waste generated in operations, already in scope under PPN 006, emissions from third-party disposal and treatment of waste generated in the reporting company's owned or controlled operations in the reporting year. And this category includes emissions from disposal of both solid waste and wastewater. You obviously will now be increasing the boundary from UK to global for this category. Business travel is category 6, again already in scope under PPN 006. Transportation of employees for business-related activities during the reporting year in vehicles not owned or operated by the reporting company. Emissions from business travellers staying in hotels are also included in this category. And again, we're going from UK boundary to a global boundary. So all of these travel will be included wherever in the UK they are. Employee commuting is category 7, and this is again already included in scope in PPN 006. Emissions are the transportation of employees between their home and their work sites. There is an option to include working from home emission calculations. We highly recommend that is an included factor, and the reason being is that since COVID we have seen so many people now doing hybrid working or working from home, and it just moves the emissions from the office to the home. Upstream leased assets, category 8, operation of assets leased by the reporting company in the reporting year, unless included in scope 1 or 2. So for example, if you're leasing cars, that's going to be included in your scope 1. So for example, your organisation leases a diesel generator for a one-off project in the reporting year. The hire company also provides the diesel. The emissions associated with the burning of the diesel for the generator to run are your scope 3 category 8 emissions. Category 9 is downstream transportation and distribution and is already in scope under PPN 006, transportation and distribution of sold products in vehicles and facilities not owned or controlled by the reporting company, and includes emissions from retail and storage. Category 10 is processing of sold products, processing of intermediate products sold in the reporting year by downstream companies. So what you do to a product to make it ready to be sold. So to explain this, I have created an example, and some of these slides have got examples on, and I hope that makes it clearer for you as to what they actually means. Your business, organisation A, develops chemicals. You provide 3 chemicals to organisation B. They then convert those 3 chemicals into a different product that then goes back to you, your organisation A. The energy, fuel and waste used in this process is organisation A scope 3 category 10 emissions. So in this example, you would be asking for organisations B's scopes 1 and 2 emissions that are related to the processing of the product that's coming back to you. Category 11, use of sold products. End of use of goods and services sold by the reporting company in the reporting year. Mandatory in this category is the direct use emissions, so electricity, petrol. There is an option to also include indirect use emissions, such as washing clothes or cooking food. But for example, you manufacture a heart monitoring device which requires mains electricity to use. The total expected lifetime electricity use of the device is accounted for in scope 3 category 11 in the year that you sold it. Category 12, end of life treatment of sold products. Waste disposal and treatment of products sold by the reporting company at the end of their life. Here the assumption is made on best practice and the advice given by the organisation. So the conversion factors that you would use to calculate your emissions would be what you are recommending is the best practice on what and how you advise the product to be disposed of at the end of its life. So, for example, you sell single-use face masks into a hospital. The emissions generated by the incineration of all of the face masks you sold in the reporting year is your Scope 3 Category 12 emissions. And it's all of the emissions associated with the product that you sold in that year, regardless of when it might be actually used by the hospital you sold it to. Category 13, downstream leased assets. Operation of assets owned by the reporting company and leased to other entities, unless included in Scope 1 and 2. For example, you own the building in which you operate. You lease out 2 offices to different organisations. The Scope 1 and 2 emissions of those offices are your Scope 3, Category 13. Category 14 is franchises. Operation of franchises in the reporting year unless already included in Scope 1 and 2. For example, you operate a franchise cleaning business. The Scope 1 and 2 emissions of each of your franchisees in the reporting year is your Scope 3 Category 14 emissions data. And then finally, Category 15 is investments. Just to say, pensions are not currently mandatory to report in Scope 3 Category 15. Operation of investments include equity investments, debt investments, project finance, managed investments and client services. So really it is only applicable if you're operating as a financial service provider or are investing for profit as part of your organisation's business model. Data collection. So the primary data collected directly from the supplier or service provider. Secondary data is from databases, ideally internationally recognised. And then EEIO, which is environmentally extended input-output data. This is a very vague way of calculating, but there are conversion factors that provide emissions data that can be used. It's mainly spend data. If you spend £10 in this SIC code, then it will equate to X emissions. SIC is the business code, like that used in Companies House. DEFRA has some. Unfortunately, they are currently 3 years out of date, so you would need to then use the Bank of England info to rationalise to current spend to make it equivalent. Or there are other websites and databases that are available that help provide this sort of data. And then finally, proxy data. So this could be, I have a conversion factor for something, it's similar to what we do, so we will translate that across. These data collections are listed in order of the best ones to use, down to the ones that are the least robust. Just wanted to recap about the timeline for this. So we said that this is required by April 2027. So April 2027 still seems quite a long way off. However, what I need to reiterate to people is that if you are doing a calendar year, which again we recommend, as I've explained, we recommend a calendar year. So that means in January 2027, to meet this milestone, you will be getting your carbon reduction plan together. And your carbon reduction plan has to be compliant for this milestone, has to include your global and all 15 categories of Scope 3. And if you sit down in January 2027 to do this, you might then start thinking, where's that data? How have I got to find that data? And so what we recommend is in January 2026, you already know where that data may be found, or who you're going to ask for it, or who's going to start recording it and collecting it and saving it ready for that report that you're going to make in January 2027. So that means that, as I say, we're recording this in September 2025. We've got a few months now to look at this, and then in January 2027, 26, we're going to start collecting that data, so we need to know. So in terms of supplier solutions for this, if you know what you are collecting, you know where your data is and you know what you're doing and you've got this covered, then you could use Track My Carbon. It's a self-managing platform that enables you to input your data and produce a compliant carbon reduction plan. If, however, you don't know where your emissions are, then please reach out to us for further help and support. What we do is we do initially just a really small project with you, which details what your boundary is, where your organisation starts and ends, what emissions are relevant to you. So which of those 15 categories are relevant to your business? And the ones that are relevant, where will we find the data for those? Which parts of your organisation? Who's going to find it? What we'll do following that meeting with you, well, after we've done a bespoke deep dive, we will then produce you with a report. You can then do a couple of things with that report. One is you can go away and you can then internally, with that information, you can then self-manage your global scope 3 emissions, and that's great. If, however, you want a bit more help with it, then you can come back to us and ask us for a bit more help, and we would be happy to help you with that. So please get in touch if there's anything that we can help and support you with any further with this. And I hope that this webinar has given you a bit more information so you know a bit more now than you knew at the start. Thank you for watching.